Arrangement, that is, organizing the communication. This lesson is about how to put in order the arguments that we want to use. In Latin, the word that was used to name this phase was dispositio, from the verb dispone, which means to put or place into an order. We will look at different options and examine the pros and cons of each. Of course, the different ways in which communication can be arranged depend on the context in a broad sense. First of all, we have to consider whether we are preparing an oral or written presentation. Second, we need to know, if possible, whether it could be the case that our communication will be interrupted, or if we can count upon a continuous attention from beginning to end. These are just some examples of relevant contextual elements that do put constraints on how we decide to organize our speech. But let us see now more in details what we can do. One of the most popular, if we may say so, ways of arranging arguments is the so-called Nestorian Order. The Nestorian Order says that a good way of arranging arguments resembles the way in which Nestor, a character in Homer's Iliad, used to organize the troops. He would put brave soldiers in the front line, then weaker soldiers in the middle, and brave soldiers again in the rear. Why, you will wonder? The reason is sad. The brave soldiers in the rear are meant to stop the weaker ones who may want to flee the battlefield. Leaving aside the sad origin of the name for this kind of organization, let us see its characteristics and pros and cons. The Nestorian Order can be used both in written and oral communication. The main precondition is to be sure that we will have the full and continuous attention by our audience. In other words, we must be sure that we won't be interrupted in the case of an oral presentation, or that the reader will go from page 1 to the last page. Why? Because if the audience can or is likely to leave us in one way or another, we risk to waste strong arguments that won't have the chance to play their role because nobody will listen to them or read them. Another possible way of organizing the arguments is the descending climax, that is, starting with strong arguments and then trailing off with ever less strong arguments. The typical situation in which we want to use this strategy is a television interview, where we are in the spotlight for a very limited amount of time. If we have something smart to say, then better say it immediately and not keeping it for a later that may never come. There is also the ascending climax, a schema where we put our best arguments last. What is the advantage? It is clear, to have the last word. When can we afford to play this trick? In situations where we really want to make an effect and, of course, we are sure that the audience will stay with us. A nice example of this strategy can be found in the speech with which Steve Jobs in 2007 announced the iPhone. He plays on the great expectations he knows the audience has. He starts low, announcing a larger iPod, and people clap and whoop, but actually that was not much of a surprise. Then he announced a mobile phone, then an internet device, and then he plays with the audience. He repeats the three items and asks, "Don't you get it? Don't you get it?" until the climax is reached. They are all in one. The last topic concerning the dispositio phase is about the beginning of a speech. One possibility is to start with what Romans called captatio benevolentiae, winning of favor. The winning of favor may take three main forms. The first one is to praise the audience. Let us see an example from a speech by the United States President Bill Clinton at the Freedom House in 1995. I'm honored to be introduced by someone who writes so powerfully about the past and is working so effectively to shape the future. I'm honored to be here with all of you and to be here at Freedom House. For more than 50 years, Freedom House has been a voice for tolerance and human dignity. People all over the world are better off because of your work. The second way in which you may try to gain the favor is by putting yourself into the shoes of the audience, showing that you can understand their feelings, their needs, that you are in a way like them. The example here is by a former Italian politician, Silvio Berlusconi. I have roots in the countryside, as I also harvested potatoes. I also spent the coldest winter evenings in the stables where the heat was and where wonderful country stories were told. I've been in the Como countryside for many years of my childhood, and these are values that are not forgotten, that one carries with himself throughout one's life. The third way is by playing humble, declaring that you're not good enough at something, but nonetheless you will try. You may even make a bit fun of yourself, like United States President George Bush in his speech to the American Enterprise Institute does when he said, "I want to thank you for overlooking my dress code violation. They were about to stop me at the door, but Irving Kristol said, 'I know this guy, let him in.'" About this winning of favor strategy, the lesson is, it works most of the times, but it must be used carefully. The risk of overdoing and sounding inappropriate or even annoying is quite high. So use it like salt on food. Don't exaggerate.